Thank you for joining the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the online festival of ideas that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? This afternoon, we're going to tackle the subject of systems thinking. It's a big topic. We're going to give it a go. My name is Ian Banks. I work at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And I'm delighted to welcome Jean Bellinger onto the DIF platform. And Jean is Director of Systems Thinking World Incorporated, has been for the last 8 years. And he's going to talk to us about his views on systems thinking. Please send your questions in. As we're going through, we can feed them through to Jean as you send them. Now, Jean, the title of this session refers to you being a sort of recovering systems thinker. Are you still one, or what's the story?
It's a lot like being a recovering alcoholic. It's ongoing. It never ends. And from time to time, I slip. And by the end of the presentation, I think the title will make sense.
Excellent. Okay. Well, do you want to go straight into it, or would you like to do any introduction first?
Is it coming through okay?
Yes, I see that.
Okay. So you'll notice that it says Recovering Systems Thinker, and there's a URL on the bottom of here. The presentation is actually done in a series of tabs in Chrome. The reason for that is that this URL on the first screen leads to this Kumu project, which is a series of elements. It's a sequence. The reason it's done as a series of a sequence is that I would encourage you to go to this project later, because every one of these elements is described in more detail, and every one of the tabs has its own video associated with it, so that there's a much deeper, so there's a lot more depth to this presentation than I can go into in a half hour or so. So that's the reason for the link on the initial slide. Now, my journey in this arena began in 1975 when I read Stafford Beer's Platform for Change, which for me was a life-changing experience. I never looked at the world the same after that. Though for the last 4 decades, as people asked me what I did and I began to tell them, you could see their eyes glaze over as they were asking themselves, why did I ask, and how the hell do I get him to stop? And if you get any number of systems thinkers together, whatever the conversation starts out to be after some period of time, it wanders around to, why isn't systems thinking more globally adopted within the world? And while it's an approach to understanding that's universally applicable, for the most part, the world's not buying. And for as long as they discuss why is it that systems thinking isn't more broadly adopted in the world, I don't think that they ever come up with the right answer. Well, obviously they don't come up with the right answer because systems thinking isn't more broadly adopted within the world. Systems thinkers try to look at things from an event perspective, understanding that the event is actually an outgrowth of some pattern of behavior that results from some set of interaction of relationships. So that if you think about going to the bathroom and turning on the water in the bathtub and watching the tub fill with water, you can see that there's a process, and you can see the pattern as the water rises, and when it gets to where you want it, you turn it off. If you turn on the water in the bathtub and you leave and you forget that you're filling the bathtub and the overflow protection doesn't work, and you go back a half hour later and find out you have a flood in the bathroom, it looks like an event. It looks like an event because of the part of it that you're paying attention to. And our difficulty is that we live in the moment. We don't live in patterns of behavior. We don't stop to realize that what's currently happening is actually the result of a pattern of behavior that comes from a set of interacting components. And this set of interacting components is actually not the major point of leverage. If you walk into the midst of the jungle and you create a clearing and you go away for 6 months and come back, you're likely to not be able to find the clearing because you never altered the context that was responsible for it being the jungle to begin with. For the organizations that we develop, they're typically developed by a group of stakeholders who all have very different mental models about what it is that they're creating. So the messes that they create patterns of behavior that don't turn out well, that create chaos, and they're problems that we have to figure out how to deal with. So system thinkers try to think about this whole sequence of relationships or cause and effect so that they're not into a one-dimensional cause and effect situation. They're thinking about relations and relations of relations and relations of relations. And to do this, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Is that why it's so difficult then? Is that our psychology, our brains work in this sort of simple causation, and it's difficult to get beyond that?
Well, typically there is so much going on an ongoing basis that we move from moment to moment to moment that we don't stop to think about and reflect on what's evolving around us. We're in the next moment. Seldom do we actually take the time to, when we end up with a problem that we realize we have to deal with, we stop and think about what caused the problem. And you'll see in a few minutes the difficulty we get in when we do that in a typical fashion. So in trying to do this, system thinkers tend to think about things from multiple perspectives so that we look at the big picture and we look at what do other people think, and we consider multiple perspectives, and we look at things over time, and we realize that there are keys to the system and how it goes together. And we look at the relations and the relations of the relations, and we cycle and continuously evolve our understanding of what's responsible for the situation being the way it is. The reason being that we have a situation that we need to deal with. Though reality itself is extremely complex. And in order to figure out how to deal with that situation in the complex reality of our lives, we use the situation as a focus to provide a context to develop a model of the relevant relationships. We sort of try and get rid of all of the things that are confusing, that are not relevant, to develop a model to help us better understand what's going on. And when we get it right, it promotes a level of understanding that provides insights as to how to deal with the situation. And though we want to deal with the situation in a manner such that we find ways to address situations that create enduring solutions, as opposed to solutions that we have to effect over and over and over and over again. Was the comment about putting Band-Aids on child's knees doesn't keep them from falling off of bicycles. It's treating the symptoms as opposed to the source of the problem. So in terms of creating the future, if we begin with a current situation and some desired situation, that creates a gap. And when are we ever satisfied with whatever the current situation is? We always want it to be something different, so that this situational gap should cause us to develop a level of understanding from which we develop a strategy that we adopt that moves the current situation toward the desired situation. The difficulty that arises is that during this adoption, it produces unintended consequences which tend to make the current situation worse or create new problems that somebody else has to deal with. You have probably heard the statement that the majority of today's problems are the direct result of yesterday's solutions. It goes on and on. So that if we developed a better understanding of why things were the way they are, and the implications of the actions that we're about to take. We could, in fact, develop strategies with disaster avoidance built in to minimize the unintended consequences. And yes, I understand that there is no way to avoid every possible unintended consequence forever. So what you do is, part of the strategy and the adoption, you build in scanning scenarios so that you are constantly looking for rabbits in the grass that are about to become problems, and you head them off at the pass before they really become problems. The difficulty is we haven't learned how to reward people for solving problems before they become problems. I mean, you reward firefighters for saving the company's butt at the 11th hour, and as a reward, you get more and more firefighters. Though we could, in fact, be better at doing this, we just have some things we still have to figure out. The other risk or the other difficulty associated with this relationship model is this difference between the desired and current situation. That gap creates a pressure to settle for less, which influences us to diminish what it is that we're striving for. It's the situation with the weight loss program that we decide we're going on as a New Year's resolution, and I'm going to lose 20 pounds. And I struggle through the first month and I lose 10 pounds and it's agonizing. So I decide that 10 pounds is enough. So I change the desired situation and there's no more gap. So there's nothing more to worry about. So I'm home free. Well, I'm home free, but I really am not back at the weight that I wanted to be. So
there's a pressure to settle for less? Is there also pressure to simplify? Like, can we deal with this level of complexity, or we just say, look, we can't deal with that, so we're only going to look at this much, and then you miss.
Right. It works. Yeah, pressure to settle for less, or reduce the complexity so that whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish, we diminish it in some way, so that wherever we are is success, and we declare success and go on to the next problem. So in all of this, over the years, I have come to realize that there are an endless array of models and methods that claim to embrace the systems paradigm. The paradigm being that, well, Bertalanffy said that it was a worldview, and Senge said that it's a discipline. It's something both or in between, whatever. But we have developed so many approaches that I always wondered, why did we need so many ways to try and deal with situations? And then I ran into Michael C. Jackson's systems thinking, creative holism for managers that gave me an additional view of things, so that if I think about systems being simple, something that you can imagine that you designed and built, or complex as something that you couldn't possibly figure out how to build, you have to sort of grow it or evolve it over time. And the individuals engaged in dealing with this situation are either unitary in that they're well aligned in terms of their goals and beliefs and how they look at the world and what they want to accomplish, or pluralist, where, well, they're not really well aligned in terms of goals and beliefs, but they can come together and agree on things for particular reasons, or coercive, being they can't ever agree on anything and they never will. Within this context, there are different approaches for dealing with things that fall in that category. And hard systems thinking being things like operations research and systems analysis and systems engineering. For unitary complex being things like system dynamics and complexity theory, and there's just an endless array of them. In the pluralist arena, you have appreciative inquiry or soft systems methodology, idealized design. And in this arena, you have emancipatory systems thinking, where the best that you can hope for is to ensure fairness. And then in the last category, what you strive for is diversity. The realization is you can't do system dynamics in a context where you can't figure out what the problem is. You don't know what it is that you're trying to model, so that depending upon where you are, there are certain things that make sense and certain things that make no sense whatsoever. So this was well and good in that it gave me a sense of, wow, I now understand why there are all these models and methods, but who can afford to do this? I mean, if I'm going to approach a problem, I need a dozen specialists, and it'll take me a year to figure out how to fix breakfast in the morning. No. So the short of it is that systems thinkers create models which are simplifications of reality intended to promote understanding. Though what we do is we labor over the development of these relationship models for days or weeks or months or years, and we develop things that look like this. And what do? We send them to other people. We inflict them on people. And we say, well, the reason that we inflict them on other people is mostly because we want to impress them with how damn smart we are. The problem is they don't care. And after they look at it for a while and until it gives them a headache, if they answer, they send back with a comment like, well, that was nice. What they really wanted to say was, why the hell did you send this to me? Because I can make no sense out of it whatsoever. So in this endless journey of relentless pursuit of figuring out something or other, a few years ago, I wrote a book I contributed to a book called Beyond Connecting the Dots, Modeling for Meaningful Results, with Scott Fort Monroe, the unbelievable creator, inventor of Insight Maker. This is a book that we wrote in conjunction with 400 sponsors, which everybody thought we were nuts. And actually, the book turned out better because of them. But this particular model was developed accidentally when feedback from a number of the participants said, you keep talking about models, quit writing so much and develop more models. So let me share this model with you. I'm sitting at the table in the morning having a pleasant breakfast when all of a sudden my wife yells down from upstairs, are you finally going to clean up that unsightly growth beneath the bird feeder, because I'm getting tired of looking at it? And all of a sudden, this whole set of relationships flashes before my eyes as to how it was that I got myself in this predicament. You see, I deal with a lot of frustration on an ongoing basis, and it continually detracts from my pleasant breakfast. But when I have a pleasant breakfast, it helps me deal with my frustration. So for several mornings in a row, I noticed the birds outside on the railing, and it creates a pleasant breakfast, helping me deal with my frustration. So after this happens for several days, it encourages me to install a bird feeder. So I do, because the thought is that the bird feeder will increase the number of birds and therefore the birds outside, and increase my pleasant breakfast, helping me deal with frustration. And the birds at the feeder improve the attractiveness of the garden, which attracts more birds, which adds to my pleasant breakfast. And I'm golden. This is going to do the thing. It's just going to make my life so much simpler. But then I never thought about, I have to buy birdseed. And if you've checked the price of birdseed these days, after experiencing that for a while, it just continues to add more to my frustration. And the birds at the feeder create spillage, which increases the need to buy bird seeds, which adds to my frustration. And spillage creates unsightly growth, which I have to figure out how to deal with, which increases my frustration. And the spillage attracts rodents that I have to figure out how to deal with, which increases my frustration. And the bird feeder attracts squirrels, which decreases the number of birds at the feeder, but increases the need to buy bird seed and increases the spillage, which is on and on and on. And now the birds are pooping all over the railing, and I have to figure out how to clean that up. So I think about this and I say, oh my God, I got to deal with this problem. But what's the problem? Well, the immediate problem is I have to clean up the unsightly growth around the bottom of the bird feeder, because if I don't, I'm going to be in the doghouse for days. But if I do that, well, am I not just going to have to clean it up next week, next month, next year, again? Well, maybe the problem is that I need to redesign the bird feeder so that it doesn't result in spillage and the squirrels don't get to it. Okay, though if I do that, I can do that. That will eliminate some of the difficulties, but isn't the problem really the fact that I don't think about my actions before I take them, so that I'm going to take some solution to some other situation tomorrow or next week, and I'm going to create another one of these nightmares for myself just simply because I don't think about what I do before I do it? What's the difference between a person that begins playing chess and a person that's pretty good at playing chess? Well, they think about their moves and the responses to their moves and the responses to the responses and the responses to those responses, and they begin to think multiple moves ahead. It's about thinking about relationships and the implications of those relationships and the implications of the implications, and continuing on and on and on until you think that you figured out all of the ones that are relevant. And when you figure out all the ones that are relevant, you don't quit. You send it to somebody else, and you, in the hopes not of impressing them with how smart you are, but in the hopes that they will ask questions that you didn't know enough to ask, to help you continue to improve the model, because the intent of the model is to simplify reality in the hopes of promoting understanding so that we get better at what it is that we're doing. Now, this particular sequence of stuff is actually a very simple shifting the burden systems archetype. It's difficult to realize that it's a shifting the burden archetype because there's so much crap in here. But the shifting the burden situation is where there's a problem symptom, and for any situation, there are typically at least two solutions to it. One quick and dirty, dealing with the symptoms, and one more involved, which will deal with the real cause of the symptoms. And if you implement the symptomatic solution, the side effect is it diminishes the apparent need to implement the fundamental solution, so it doesn't get implemented. So you implement the symptomatic solution over and over and over again because the problem doesn't go away. My comment about putting band-aids on children's knees doesn't keep them from falling off bicycles. Now, it's just that in the midst of this situation, it's difficult to realize that it's really a systems archetype in action. I say systems archetype if you're not familiar with them. In 1937, Ludwig von Bertalanffy, an Austrian biologist who, from most people's mind, is the father of modern systems theory, put forth the thought that there are basic underlying structures which operate across all branches of science. And if you learn about the structures, you can take a lot of your learning from one discipline to another. You just have to figure out the labels on the structures that are operating. These are actually the archetypes that Senge put forth in the fifth discipline. And when I first read about Bertalanffy's thought, I said, well, that's ludicrous. How can you have the same structures operating across all branches of science? And the thought was, oh, well, all of the branches of science are a fabrication of man, not nature. So of course they're all the same. So there's a video in the midst of this that explains all of these in the relationship between them. And there's a program online that explains every one of them, a video for each one of them in detail. And the archetypes are actually marvelous because in any complex situation, you come to find out there are one or two archetypes at the center of it, which are driving the behavior of the entire structure. And when I worked in high-tech organizations, the antics that went on used to drive me nuts until I learned about archetypes. And then the antics that went on were a source of humor because you could tell where they were going. So
the all Hollywood movies are, based on whatever it is, 7 story.
Right. The same kind of thing.
There's one question that's coming in from the audience, because when you were talking about the bird feeder, you mentioned redesigning it to sort of help sort things out. And there's a question of whether there's an overlap between design thinking and systems thinking.
I think that there's only one thinking. We've just applied tons and tons of labels to it, and for two reasons. When you attempt an approach and it doesn't help you understand how to deal well with the situation, you need a new approach. So you evolve the thinking and you put a new label on it. The other thing is you can't make a place for yourself in life hawking somebody else's approach. You got to have your own approach. And a lot of them out there are just that. So I think design thinking and systems thinking, it's I don't know. They're so closely intertwined. And though I'm a recovering systems thinker, and for the most part, I seldom ever talk to people about systems thinking. You'll find out that this is a historical perspective. When I talk to people today on a day-to-day basis, we don't talk about systems thinking. What I talk about is now when people ask me what I do, I tell them that I tell stories about relationships and their implications. That's it. And they say, well, doesn't that sort of apply to everything? And I say, yep, it does. And I mentioned to Ian earlier that I suffer the curse of the systems thinker, which is everything is interesting because it's all about relationships and their implications. There are no things. Well, you take a bundle of relationships and you apply a label to them and you call it a thing, but it's not. It's just a bundle of relationships. We do it to simplify things so that we can deal with it. Where am I? Oh, so
you make one chess move, but it's the point is how it's related to all the other chess moves that might come in the future.
Right. So the outgrowth of this epiphany of mine about coming to understand that it's about stories, right? In other words, rather than inflicting models upon people, I have to tell them stories. When you go to the play, another epiphany was a connection between a model and a play. If you go to the play and you sit there, you watch the relationships develop between the actors from one act to another, and at the end of the play, you understand the story that has unfolded. What we have done historically is we have walked up to people, we have given them the script for the play, and in 5 minutes said, what do you think? All right. And it's impossible. I mean, there's just no way to get a sense of what it is without seeing it unfold over time. So I've begun to tell stories. This is.
And does this go back to sort of like our psychology? We're programmed to tell stories and to listen to stories in the same way that maybe we're programmed to sort of, look at simple causality rather than systemic causality.
Well, I think the difficulty is the context that we live in, which is moment to moment to moment, as opposed to actually stopping to look at. When we stop to think about the relationships, as opposed to simply cause effect, let me get on to something else, we make out better. All right. So this is an example of the kid who was given the job to tend sheep, and he was told that if he cries wolf, the townspeople will come running. So he's tending sheep and he gets bored and he wants attention. So he cries wolf because he knows the townspeople will come running and make him the center of attention. So we have a boredom relief loop. But at the same time, if he cries wolf and there is a wolf, it represents a truth which improves the beliefometer scale, which improves the likelihood that people will come running. So we have an improved belief loop. But if he cries wolf and there is no wolf, it's a lie, which diminishes the beliefometer, diminishing the likelihood that the townspeople will come running. And what you're looking at, which is explained in more detail normally, is Aesop's fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. as an unfolding story of relationships and their implications. I personally believe that Aesop's Fables is one of the greatest book on systems theory ever written. So based upon all of this insightful bullshit, I guess, I developed a course called Certified Systems Thinker, which walks a person through how to develop relationship models, and one that walks a person how to develop stories in Kumu. Kumu is the storytelling software that I looked for 14 years and almost gave up. And after several people went through this course, the feedback that they gave me was such that I couldn't believe it. I thought they were just blowing smoke. Though a couple of people then said, okay, how do I sell systems thinking to my organization? Just, oh my God, I've failed miserably. But it was a good question because it caused me to think for probably almost a week. And what I came up with was the systems thinking postscript. No, that's where I'm at. Which was an understanding as to why you can't sell systems thinking to your organization. People always, always, always do exactly what makes the most amount of sense to them based on their current understanding in the context of the moment. This is a quote from me, so of course it's relevant. The second quote is from Spencer Johnson in The 1 Minute Salesperson, which says, while everyone loves to buy, almost no one likes to be sold. You either have been or have seen someone wandering around the store looking at things, and the clerk comes up and says, may I help you? And the typical answer is, no, I'm just looking. Do you ever think about the reason for the answer is because the story that runs through that person's mind and heartbeat is, how can you be so presumptuous as to think I need help? Go away, don't bother me. From Fight Club, the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. So the first rule of systems thinking is don't talk about systems thinking. And Buckminster Fuller said, if you want to change how a person thinks, give up. You cannot change how one thinks. Give them a tool to use, which will gradually cause them to think differently over time. And for the systems thinker, they are the tool. What they have to do with it is different than they probably ever thought, because, as Lao Tzu said, the leader is best when people barely know that he exists. Not so good when people obey and acclaim him. Worst when they despise him. Fail to honor people, they fail to honor you. But of a good leader who talks little, when his work is done, his aims fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. So the way that you get an organization to adopt systems thinking without knowing about it, it's a stealth approach. You drop a few unbelievable, insightful systems thinkers in the midst of the mess, and they ask, and? To me, that is the essence of systems thinking. And what does this influence? And what influences this? And if you take this action, what does it influence? And what does that influence? And then what influences this? And you go on and on and on, and it's the same question over and over again. This is Why Nations Fail by Asimoglu and whatever. You take an inclusive political system promoting an inclusive economy, which generates a prosperity for all. Very nice scenario. The difficulty is that out of that, a few become more wealthy than others, and they really like that. So they promote an extractive political system, which promotes an extractive economy, which improves their own wealth. And at the same time, that extractive political system diminishes the inclusive political system, diminishing the inclusive economy, diminishing the prosperity for all. But it doesn't have such an impact on the wealth of the few because of the reinforcing structure that they've already created. And in addition to that, the extractive political system promotes an extractive economy, diminishing the inclusive economy, which leads to economic demise. And you have the entire book in 4 loops. And so what I am currently doing, I am so overtime. I'm currently taking the several hundred stories well, several hundred models that I have developed over the last umpteen years, and I'm now turning them into stories in what's called the Perspective Project, so that in each one of these things, it's a video about the unfolding of a relationship model, which has an insight in the midst of it. And I invite people to go look at them, comment on them. I post them on Twitter and LinkedIn and whatever. So, and there's two videos that I would encourage people to watch by Dan Barber, How I Fell in Love with a Fish, and the Foie Gras Parable. They are the two finest stories of relationships in action that I have ever seen, and he never mentions systems thinking once. So, and as a parting thought, in all of the things that I do, there's essentially just a couple of tools that I use. They're web-based tools: Kumu for qualitative models, Insight Maker for qualitative and quantitative models, DrawExpress for doing relationship models on my smartphone, Snagit for doing videos, YouTube where I keep them all, and Digo, which hopefully helps me find all this stuff after I create it. I'm done.
I'm going to say because thank you, Gina, and you've given some tools and links. Sophie, who's listening online, would also like a link to the book that you mentioned in the middle of that presentation that you contributed to. But I'm sure we can organize that on the page. Thank you.
Go ahead.
It's a very insightful presentation, and we have a question. So I was probably going back to the start of it, where you were talking about the sort of weight loss system where we settle for less. There's a question from the online audience that asks, how do you break that? How do you break that cycle where you settle for less?
Well, which Alcoholics Anonymous works to a great extent. There are some of the diet programs that work to a great extent, but they typically don't work for the reasons that they tell you about. They work because of the support system that's part of them. Right? So that for a group of people to work together, to support each other, to realize that, yes, it's hard, but it's possible, and we're here to support you, so that they don't let you settle for less. That they know that you're better than that. It's willpower won't get you there. I mean, Sengi says that in the fifth discipline. Willpower will not get you there.
Even though they'd like you to believe that that's what's happening, in fact, it's something else that is happening.
Well, I would like to believe that willpower will get me there. It just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I mean, the tension between where I am and where I want to be, and it just willpower. I mean, our greatest capacity is to lie to ourselves about anything. I mean, we can make ourselves believe anything, regardless of how ridiculous it is. And I'll do it tomorrow.
And does that come back to stories as well? We can sort of tell ourselves any story that we want, we'll believe it. But actually, stories are how we need to think about. Let's think less about systems maps and more about the story that they reveal.
I mean, it's the way that we understand it is to develop a story that shows us how the relationships unfold over time. I mean, I'm sorry, I had a thought, but I lost it before it came out.
That's fine. There's actually another question that and I imagine you've come across this plenty of times in your work. Says, Jean, could you share some practical ways of thinking and behaving when you need to act in normal life with people not equipped with the necessary information to deal with this systems approach?
Well, and that is, I can't change anybody's mind. Only you can change your mind. The best thing I can possibly do is provoke thought. So I have to figure out how to ask questions to get you to think. But I have to learn how to ask questions in a way that's not terribly, terribly annoying. I mean, as soon as I come to you and tell you you're stupid, how much of what I have to say are you likely to listen to after that? Probably not much. So I need to interact with people in a way that the best way possible to interact with people is in a way that makes them feel good about how smart they are. All right. So that you begin asking them questions you know that they'll know the answer to. And you continue to lead them to more and more difficult questions. And I know it's manipulation for the right reasons, but it's still manipulation.
Yes. Well, yeah. You can have. Good
so I can't come to you and tell you that you're wrong. All right. I developed this paper once called Change Management, the Columbo approach. You remember Columbo?
Yeah.
All right. He was beautiful in terms of continuing to walk around, scratching his head, discounting himself about what he was confused about, helping other people dig holes to fall into. Okay. And
he'd ask just one last question, which was
if you came in through the door, how did the newspaper end up on a nightstand in the hallway? Okay.
But he'd feign confusion. No, I'm confused about this. How did that happen?
Because people, for the most part, people are anxious to help. People feel good about helping. So let them.
I've got a message that you could have us letting us see your face for the last few minutes of
talk.
That's what I'm getting from the side. Ah, there we go. Hello.
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 I'm still me. So if people go to systemswiki.org, which I should have put up the link to the book that I mentioned and the educational programs are there. They're free, self-paced, web-based, and if people go through them and have questions, there are places in the program you can just ask the question and it'll show up in my mailbox and I answer all of them.
That's great, and I think that and that we will put up links on the session page to the perhaps if Gene, if you could put the links up on the session page, that would help, and then people can access them from there.
I can put the links on the session page.
This is what I'm hearing. If you have a My DIF account, that's I guess you might have to create.
I'll just send you the links and you can put them there. How's that?
That's another solution.
Does that work?
That also works, I'm sure. Yeah, we can do that. And yes, and I think I mean, you were mentioning earlier how you need to provoke thoughts in people. And you certainly provoke thoughts in me, and hopefully in the whole audience. And as you said this before the session even started to me, that it sort of never ends. You keep being interested in further and further things. You endlessly provoking your own thoughts. There's always more and more areas to explore. Everything becomes interesting as you if you start using this system thinking approach. Is that how you see it?
If you look at my LinkedIn page, it says I'm a storyteller of relationships and their implications. I don't tell people I'm a systems thinker. I develop stories about relationships and their implications.
There we go. Well, we just had a question from somebody who he said, do we need to become effective storytellers before being effective systems thinkers? And it sounds like to be influential systems thinker, you need to tell stories. It sounds like
or just tell stories and forget about being systems. Just keep asking and, right?
Yeah.
What are the implications of this? I mean, I essentially distilled what the world calls systems thinking into one word. Well, one question. And
I think this is yeah.
Oh, and if you go back to Jackson's framework, the question works in all of those dimensions. As opposed to needing 2,000 models and methods, you only need one. The question is, and what is the likely future if we just continue to kill each other endlessly? And people in the Middle East ought to ask that.
Thank you, Gene. I think that's probably the
This is pretty good for a 20-minute presentation.
Well, absolutely. I know it's a wrap up. I got from the track bar. Let's say it's a 40-minute presentation, but to ask the question "and" seems like something I took from this, and also to look at the, as you said, the relations of the relations of the relations, the connections, and then as you say, to tell stories about them. Thank you very much for
You're very welcome.
Sharing all this with us. And as you say, there are plenty of links. Well, on your website, on the session website, people can find out more through visiting them. If you're watching the session on DIF on demand, then your comments are still very welcome. You can use the space for comments around the screen. And there are plenty of other. This is one of sort of 200 or so DIF sessions. There are plenty more coming up. You can look at
if I go into this session on DIF and ask a question, the question being the 2 links, will they be there for people to look at in the future?
Yes, they will be. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do that right after the session.
Because people can access this session after on the catch up, so they can revisit the page.
Okay. Take care.
Great. Thank you very much, Gene.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So yes, that was a system thinking session on DIF. There are plenty more sessions to come today, throughout this week, and for the following 2 weeks. So take a look at thinkdiff.co to see more sessions on this sort of subject and wider subjects too. So thanks very much. We will see you at the next session.